why systems matter. So the other day, I was having a conversation with an organization. We were giving a presentation introducing why we exist. And I'm going to go ahead and pull this slide and let this sit behind us. And so I'm going to kind of tell you who Reviewer is, why we exist, and kind of come full circle to today's conversation. So back in 2012, our team was heavily involved as a pure volunteer, specifically as a reader or evaluator for scholarship programs, so scholarships, grants, and funding opportunities. Way back in 2012, a lot of these tools on this list really didn't exist, or they weren't being utilized for scholarship management. I think looking at this, a lot of these tools are likely things that you guys may be using currently. If you look down here, way at the bottom though, physical mail, that was the life that we lived. So as a pure 100% volunteer, we literally had hundreds and hundreds of these scholarship what I call binders or packets being physically mailed to our doorsteps. We were tasked with handwriting notes and feedback and scores. And a lot of times we'd either have to physically mail it back or we meet in person with other committee members. And at the time, we did this out of the kindness of our hearts. We were obviously volunteering for membership-based associations, nonprofits, mission-driven organizations. So we wanted to do it, but it was quite cumbersome. The challenges that we started to run into, though, were a couple years later, and that was kind of the induction of online tools. So you have all these scholarship-making organizations that kind of took a step backwards and said, okay, well, look, what are the kind of key components or what I call systems that go into managing a scholarship? And they kind of think about it from three buckets. They have to collect scholarship applications. They need to be able to hold on to them or do something with them. And then at some point, they're going to go through a review and selection process. And so basically what ended up happening is you all these organizations start to use all these other kind of vendors or platforms or tools out there that really didn't, weren't built for the task at hand. So from an application perspective, it was a ton of built-in web forms, a lot of emails, a lot of downloading of documents. There were still some physical applications being dropped off at like guidance counselor offices or in person. We'd have fillable PDFs that would get emailed in. And what ended up happening from that point on is all the other kind of negative ramifications. So as these applications come in, there was a tremendous amount of operational overhead, downloading of documents. They had to recompile them. They put them into spreadsheets. They had to kind of figure out, okay, I have an application here. I've got a reference here. I've got a transcript here. Who does this belong to again? Oh, yeah, it belongs to this person. They have to consolidate them and then put them into one centralized hub. So there's a lot of hands-on human interactions touching stuff, which generally speaking, when we're dealing with, a potential financial need or funds, this is generally a no-no, right? So these organizations are limited staff. They're becoming completely overwhelmed with operations. And then by the time it got into my hands as an evaluator or a judge or a selector, it became kind of a mess because what happened is I was told, hey, go to this Google Drive link or go to Dropbox or go here, go find a folder of this applicant, download their information, find all the file uploads, read through it, and then go to this big master spreadsheet. And in that spreadsheet, I want you to leave your comments, your notes, your scores. It's going to automatically do some tabulation for you. And then once you're done, please, either put it back in Google Drive or send it back to us. And so what ended up happening here is two really awful things. I'm sure there's more things that happen. Number one is that you'd have all these applicants or these scholarship submitters who never made it to us. So let me explain. What happened was one of two things. It would go to physical spam filters, right? So they'd send in like an email of their scholarship applications, their references, and their transcripts, and something would flag it for spam. So by the time we started doing the review, there were actually a handful of highly deserving individuals that we never even had a chance to look at. Or along that journey, as there was a lot of downloading and exporting and recompiling, something got lost. So we would sit down, we go through entire review, judging, scoring processes. At times, checks were cut, and then 6 months later, we hear that there was a deserving candidate that never even had a fair chance to even get it looked at. So obviously, compliance is a huge issue, but also behind the scenes, right? Like we're all mission-driven organizations. We exist for a main purpose. We just physically can't allow that stuff to happen. With that said, some of the other negative components that came into play was the lack of redaction of data. So it was very clear, and this may be us as included, we knew who the applicants were, friends of their families, demographic details were being shared. And so when we went to go through reviews, there wasn't like a consistent scoring mechanism in place, which led us to basically, pick our favorites. And there was very deserving applicants who were not being selected because of things like that. So um, that's what we built Reviewer for. And as I kind of told that story the other day, the kind of comment that came up was, okay, great. So you took all these different kind of moving parts, you built systems around them. And I started to think, internally about the importance of having systems in place, not just for things like this, but just in operations in general. Everything goes hand in hand, right? So how you collect your application, a direct impact on how you're going to manage it. It influences whether or not you're going to be able to store things safely, securely from a data privacy perspective. It's going to influence the type of communication you're able to do. It's going to influence how you're able to share it with your review teams. It's going to influence how you allow them to actually conduct their review processes, share results back to you. It's going to impact things like reporting ability, and also long term. We want to show impact. And so if you're collecting, ongoing data from your scholars, fund disbursement forms, thank you letters, whatever it might be, if it's a renewable scholarship, it's going to impact how you manage those processes as well. And so when I think through like the kind of concept here of like why is it important to have a system, and I think about a system as like a flywheel or a circle effect. At any time, if one of those systems starts to break down, it has just an instant stop or a pause on the overarching program itself, right? So what happens tomorrow has a direct impact on what happens 3 months from now. And so that's kind of what led us to have this webinar here today of like, why are systems important? How do we take kind of what we're looking at here, and just for fun, we toss this into AI or Chat GPT and said, hey, if I was to run a scholarship program and this is what my stack of tools look like or how I manage it, like what would that look like? And literally this is what it kicked out. Pure chaos. And maybe some of you can kind of feel like what this guy is going through or this lady is going through in this photo. It's just an overwhelming, comprehensive mess of activities. So how do we kind of get away from this type of concept and instead, and I'm not going to go through all these slides here, I'm going to send this out to you, right? But like basically the negative impact of what I just talked about is a really poor experience for the scholar. These are very important programs. We need them to be able to get into some type of system or tool. Eliminate any thought around like how to do a submission so they can focus 100% on creating the best version of themselves or their application so they can get funded. It's going to be completely disorganized. There's a ton of potential human error. There's a lot of time that goes into it, both from an applicant's perspective, an auction team perspective, and a review team perspective. We have some pretty severe data security compliance risks that are coming up. Then we also just had a high level of potential of people missing out on opportunity. Again, there's a lot of bullet points here. You guys can kind of read those on your own time. So how do we get away from this kind of image here and what that process looks like? Implement systems in place to ultimately have something that looks more like this. So taking that kind of messy spider web of tools and processes and workflows and kind of consolidate them into one very clean, clear 4-step or 3-step process of collecting applications, managing them, and then reviewing them. And then within each one of those, having like dedicated and proper systems in place to automate things, as well as just kind of do things the right way. So my goal here today is just tell that story, because I think, it's a lot of times we can kind of sit back and say, well, you know what? We're a nonprofit or we're a foundation or we have limited staff time. I'm okay rolling up my sleeves and playing in emails and playing in spreadsheets. And we often kind of forget that, like, when you think about a system, the negative effects down the road. So, okay, great. You make up a third of the program. So while you're open to rolling up your sleeves and kind of doing things the way you have been, what about the applicant's experience? What about the review team's experience? What about the donor's experience, right? And so my goal is to kind of just tell that story, because I think it does resonate really well with a lot of people. It also speaks kind of broadly like why we exist, right? Like we were volunteers for these programs. We want to see these applicants who are applying for scholarships find success. It broke our heart that they weren't having that opportunity, and we built Reviewer. So at this point in time, we do thousands of these programs every single year. And so when I talk about these systems that are in place, it wasn't just us saying, hey, here's some systems that we think you should leverage. Although to an extent we did live those lives, it's more so like the brainchild or a built for the people, by the people type of mechanism where over the course of a decade working with thousands of organizations, here are the proven systems that should be leveraged to manage a scholarship. And if you do nothing else, following this kind of workflow is going to put you in a position where it's going to be a very successful program. And then on top of that, layering on any potential customizations or something that makes it very unique to you guys. So with all that said, my initial gut instinct is that if you look at this little spider web over here, those might be some of the tools that you're using alongside other things. So how do we kind of visualize that into Reviewer? My goal today is not to demo the platform, although I will show you the system. It's more so how do I take these 3 dedicated systems, applications, operations, and then review and selection, and then kind of visualize like what systems go into each one of them and why they're important. Obviously using Reviewer to kind of visually showcase what that would look like. So first and foremost, the first system we have to kind of think through is like the submission experience. And I use that term quite bit, and it really is an experience. I think far too often we look at all these programs as like data. We're collecting data, we're collecting applications, we're collecting file uploads, we're collecting scores. But these are people, they're real people. And so we need to treat them as such. So for me, as I'm designing scholarships, or if I'm consulting or working alongside another organization, and I try to build out like what does a scholarship experience look like, or what are those systems? There's kind of three core elements I want to take into consideration. So for many of you, you have a very dedicated scholarship fund serving a certain use case or need or mission or a vision. And so for some of you, things like academics may not be relevant. For some of you, academics is the main thing that you're looking at. For me, though, I try to combine three things. Number one is I do want to get a better sense or understanding of an applicant. Let me backtrack a second. What I want to do is I want to build a persona about my scholars, right? I want to build a persona that helps me differentiate one person from the next to make sure that when I go to fund somebody or go through a review, that I'm actually selecting the most qualified candidates where I'm going to be able to have the biggest impact on their lives. And I don't personally feel that that can be done through just academics or just financial need or just essays, right? So it's kind of this collective components of all of it together. So I want to look at, tell me more about yourself as a person. Tell me more about some of your academic achievements. And that also not just includes things like test scores or GPAs or ACT scores, but also like, are you a volunteer anywhere? Like, what are you doing while in school? Do you have any extracurricular activities? If you are an organization providing like ongoing scholarships like for like professional development, tell me more about like the work-life balance, things like that. On top of that, I do want to get a better sense of financial needs. If I have two applicants applying to my scholarship, one is like the grandson of Warren Buffett, and the other is coming from a single family household. You can probably connect the dots of maybe who has more financial need than the other. Not saying that one is more deserving than the other, but that is one element that goes into that persona that I just kind of talked about. And then the last piece to this puzzle is kind of two things. It's a combination of personal storytelling and essays, as well as external reference requests. And so for me, like, there's nothing better than essays or personal storytelling to help a candidate differentiate themselves versus one another. We live in a time now where everybody's volunteers, everybody's getting incredible test scores. Why that is, I don't know. It could be, going back to like the curriculums, but everybody has their own personal stories. And so now, how do you sort of layer on all of those elements together to kind of build a persona about them? So kind of coming full circle, how does this relate to systems? Well, we need to look at all the moving parts or components to how we collect this information. Because if you look at it from a high level, we're collecting personal identifying information. We're collecting likely, potentially test scores or student records. We're also maybe collecting things like IRS documentation or FAFSA to help build financial needs analysis. So these are file uploads. And so how do we, systematize this, create an ecosystem of efficiency? How do we make it very, very low barrier for the applicants, but then also kind of cover ourselves and also look out for your applicants, and think through things like data security and think through privacy. Nowadays it's a huge topic. If I'm going to go and apply to your scholarship and you're asking for an IRS tax document, how do I know what's going to happen with that? Where's it going to go when it's done, right? Like, what's it going to be used for? Is it going to be safe? Are you going to get hacked, right? Is that going to be sold to somebody? So these are the systems that I'm really talking about. So to help kind of visualize that, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about references. I don't know if anybody wants to toss a quick like emoji, thumbs up or something in the chat if you're collecting references at all for your programs. I've got some pretty stern feelings on like the old kind of outdated processes of letters, and potentially one of the emerging trends that we've started to see, which is incredibly powerful, but at the same time, it does create a potential barrier because it's a bit more complex, right? But it also at the same time, complex isn't a bad thing. It just means that we need systems. So let's take a look at some of these things. So everything starts with what I call a profile. You can't have systems in place without having some type of organization. Maybe this is some of you guys, but I can't physically operate with my email inbox as my main storage hub, right? You can't be sending me a bunch of scholarship applications as PDFs, or I can't be going to like Jot forms or Google Forms, having to download them, export them, recompile them, put them into folders. Like, my brain it gives me anxiety. So with reviewer, or at least what the goal here should be, to create a concept called a profile. Go back to 2012. I loved the idea and the concept behind a binder. I just hated the physical nature of a binder. So how do you take that concept and you virtualize it? Well, you basically create the structure of the binder, and maybe on the very first page is the application. And then over time, you add more and more pages, and that binder continues to grow and grow and grow until you have everything from application to references to the selection processes and the ongoing collection of the applicant's information. So in review, if you think through all the moving parts, you've got people, and again, I'm going to use that term quite a bit, people and experiences, because it's not data. These are real lives that we're trying to change. Have their submission forms, which is plural because you might collect an initial application and then more information from them in the future. You might be an organization that does like a letter of intent, then you do application, and then you go to post selected deliverables. You got file uploads, references, transcripts, tax documentations. Maybe you're collecting things like headshots because you want to use it for marketing purposes. Maybe you're a very kind of transformative organization and you've ditched essay writing and you've moved towards essay videos, right? It is a barrier for applicants, but it is an absolutely incredible way for a applicant to tell their personal story and let their personality start to shine through. On top of that, ideally there is communication going on. There's judging and scoring processes that are going on, which we'll come back to here in a moment. So how do you take all those moving parts and centralize them into one place? And we do that through a concept called profiles. So applicants come in, they tell us who they are, and then from there, it drops them into a scholarship application. So everything that you're looking at here is completely customizable in Reviewer. So please understand that whatever your current scholarship data requirements are, how you want to build these personas, as I call them, you'll have full control over. With that said, I do feel this is a very well-structured application that if you did nothing and you implemented this, you have a very well ran machine. And so the idea is, number one, how do we start to build a persona for the applicant? So this is the personal identifying information, who they are. This is kind of a little bonus thing I'm going to toss in there right now. We have an organization that we work with that does well over 100 scholarships, right? That may not be you guys, but just bear with me. And the biggest challenge that they ran into was one of two things, or a combination of two. Number one is that you'd have applicants applying for absolutely everything, whether or not they were eligible or not. So, for example, if your scholarship is only available to those in Louisiana, somebody here in Lincoln, Nebraska applying probably wouldn't be eligible. But if you have a large volume program, how do you do two things? One, not waste the applicant's time, because again, we want to be sensitive to these people because they are people. And then two, how do you not vet through a bunch of candidates that just quite frankly can't meet your eligibility requirements? So there's this ideation behind, okay, let's answer some questions. And then based off of the, we'll either allow them to proceed or not, just to not waste their time. Or bigger picture, if you offer multiple funding opportunities, some of them might have very, very specific criteria. And this is the example I was going to kind of get into, is that this particular client of ours, they had scholarships going unfunded, right? There year over year, there were scholarships that had such unique criteria that nobody even applied to it, because the reason why is that nobody even knew that it existed or that they could apply to it. So we kind of looped in this concept called a matching tool, where this is a very basic example. The applicants can answer a series of questions, and then based off of their answer, the system will say, hey, you know what? As because we're building a persona around you, here are the three or the two or the one scholarships that are available that you align with. Which of or all of them do you want to apply for? So going back to what I said earlier, this system here is basically taking away any thought process from the applicants. It has to be an extremely low barrier. They come into the system and they interact with it, right? It doesn't interact with them, they interact with it. And in real time, we're building a personalized experience that kind of guides them in the direction that they belong. So their sole 100% focus is their essay writing, the document collection, putting forth their best effort to achieve success. Okay, so phase two to this then would be some of those systems I talked about, which was the three components. So academic achievements, financial need analysis, and then personal storytelling. So in this example, we want to know more about like, where are you going to school? Where do you want to go to school? And then obviously like, tell us your transcripts, tell us your grades, tell us more about your extracurricular opportunities. The next piece to this specific form is the financial needs. So I think this is kind of unique in the sense that they do two things. I'm going to work from the bottom up. It basically says, okay, well, like, tell us more about your financial needs, right? Like, what's your family's income? Back it up with tax documentation, so 1040 docs, FAFSA, SAI calculations. But then it says, okay, like, if you were to get funding, like, how much funding do you need? And then what are you going to actually end up using it for, right? Because you guys to be able to show impact. And again, there's a difference between paying for books versus paying for housing. But then it goes on to talk about, okay, if you were not to be selected, how would you pay for this? This is going back to my Warren Buffett example earlier on. You might have an applicant that says, you know what, like I 100% will take out student loans for the absolute entirety, or I'm going to go take out a personal loan to pay for it because I know that this scholarship is going to change my life. You might have another candidate that says, well, I'm just going to use my parental assistance because Warren Buffett's my grandfather and he's going to help me pay for it. So again, we're kind of taking all these pieces, connecting them together to build a story. The last piece to this puzzle, which I'm going to pause on here, is your personal storytelling. So this is three different kind of dedicated components. One is the video essay. Again, the ability for the applicants to record a video, tell us more about why the scholarship is going to change their life, why they need the funding, tell us more about themselves. The second component here is a written essay. You could do it optional. You could do both of them. You could do one or the other. It's up to you. And then the last piece to this is those letters or reference requests. So moving on to those references, again, these are all systems, right? Every one of these components has a system behind the scenes to make this a reality. When it comes to references, one of the challenges, and I always use this example, I love my wife to death, but if I was asked to write her a letter of recommendation, it would be awful. I'm just not a very good writer, and I'm going to wait till the very last minute. With that said, the letter she writes for me is probably going to be tremendous, right? So the challenge there is, okay, does that mean that the letter is a direct reflection of the candidate, or is it more so on the ability of the person writing the letter? So the emerging trend that we've started to see pop up over the years is the applicants will put in like the name and email of who is submitting that reference. It will then send a direct email to that person saying, hey, Dwight, you've been asked to write a reference on behalf of Kyle, click here to do so. They then dedicated a reference portal. So again, this is a system. And that reference portal absolutely could allow for a letter upload. But in this example, and I don't love this one, it's like a ranking tool. So it's asking the reference to rank them on a series of qualities that they're looking for their candidates. What I would maybe instead do is, hey, give your references 3 essay prompts, keep them short, keep them simple, keep them sweet, like 500 characters or less, and then basically say, hey, as a reference, we want you to answer these 3 questions. So it lowers the barrier for the person writing the reference. They can save, they can log out, they can come back later. The quality is going to be significantly better because they're just interacting with the questions as they appear. And then number 3 is more from a compliance perspective. When you go to do a review and selection, you're actually comparing apples to apples because every candidate had kind of the same data associated with them from their different references. I'm going to come back to this here in a second for some additional kind of systems, but that's kind of like in an ideal world, like this is a very well-structured application process. The next piece to that, if we go back a couple slides, and I probably should add some navigation here so I'm not clicking around, is that middle section. So managing it, right? So applicants come in. We basically took all these elements here on the left and we eliminated them. Applicants come in, they create their profile, they fill it out. The next piece to this puzzle is hopefully to eliminate all of these items in the middle. So I never want to see you have to download or export anything whatsoever ever again. Now, to be clear, you're going to be doing things like that, and that's fine. But the idea here is how do you take all the moving parts that go into operations? So a lot of times we think about this like, okay, great, applications come in. And now what I basically have to do is take those applications and then confirm that I have their data and then to give it to my team for review. When in reality, there's a bit more on top of that, right? Ideally speaking, like whatever mechanism you're using to store this information is safe and secure. I need to continue to re-emphasize the importance of data security and privacy. Anytime we're dealing with these types of programs, like there is PII being submitted, documents, personal information, student records, there's going to be some form of PII. You physically cannot allow that to live in your inbox. You physically cannot put that into a spreadsheet and then share it offline with people. That just is not an okay thing to do. I may be overstepping and being a bit too critical, but I've seen firsthand applicants who have information get lost. I've seen organizations that have been hacked. I've also seen organizations that award scholarship funds, and then a parent or a scholar calls them and says, hey, I did not get selected. I know somebody who did. That is not fair. You had a biased judging process against me. And without having these systems in place, it's very, very hard for us to fight that. Awful things to talk about, but these happen on a daily basis. So from an operation perspective, I think that you can summarize this in like 6 or 7 different bullet points, but you have to have a dedicated hub or a dedicated kind of command center to manage progress. Again, we want to, the goal of us as a leader or as a scholarship provider is to create opportunity and success for the applicants. And so that's small things, sending out automated reminder messages, because as you know, humans will always procrastinate and wait to the very, very last minute. So why don't we get ahead of that and send them little helpful nudges? Same thing goes for references. While yes, we do rely on the applicants to confirm that their references did their work, can we also maybe send them some reminders to help them along? How do you communicate with people? How do you provide transparency, provide updates along the way? How do you redact any potential personal identifying information? We'll come back to that topic in a minute. If you have a multi-phase program, how do you kind of systematize it where it kind of flows from one phase to the next? That could be as simple as like a quick thumbs up vetting phase to an interview phase to an ongoing data collection phase. How do you report back on impact? How do you collect the scores? All of those are the components that you have to have systems for from an operation perspective. So going way back to the beginning, it really isn't just three columns, right? Like you have three dedicated experiences: applicant, operation, review. But then within each one of those experiences, there are very mission critical tasks. And if we miss any of those elements, right, I'm being very repetitive. If you miss any of those elements, it does have a negative impact on the following elements that will pop up. So again, how do you visualize this concept? So right off the bat, I'm going to go and just stay on this slide. You have a command center. So the idea behind reviewer, and again, I'm kind of jumping all over the place at this point, is your command center is like the place that you live and die by. Everything flows through this main dashboard. You can track progress. You can track your dates and deadlines. You can extend deadlines. You can see who has maybe started an application but hasn't yet finished it. You can see who they are. You can see how far they've made it. You can send them reminder messages. And then kind of what I'm highlighting here is you can also see how many people have been requested to submit references. Are they done or not done? If they're not done, who isn't done? How far have they made it? Do you want to send them reminders? Again, it's really thinking through like the full life cycle of the program and then being able to visualize it very, very quickly so you know where you're at within the grand scheme of things. Kind of moving on though to the main systems I want to look at. I've used the terminology profile quite a bit. Again, going back to 2014 after the binder incident, now we're downloading, we're exporting, we're playing in spreadsheets. So the idea here is this system is basically taking every single scholar and creating a profile and then being able to visualize them. Because again, you have to visualize them as a person, not their data. To be very clear, it is not applications, it is not file uploads, it is not references, it is a person and their comprehensive persona. So I will from here just click into somebody's name, and here's how you can visualize that concept called a profile. So I got Michael. Michael is one of my scholarship applicants, and in real time, we have instantly been able to take all of the content we collected from Michael: file uploads, short answers, essays, scripts, test scores, video files. Everything instantly gets consolidated into one action on it. So one of the systems is going to be communication. I prefer you to not be emailing in your own personal inboxes, right? It just gets a little bit messy. Can you still send bulk emails and bulk messages? Yes, you bet. You are also able to log on a per person basis direct one-to-one communication. So this might be like, hey, Michael, I see you uploaded a 2023 tax document. Can you update it with 2024? Or, hey, Michael, you've actually been selected. Now you have advanced to phase two, which is going to be like a fund disbursement form or an acceptance packet. There's a way for you to log internal notes. So it's very possible that your team is very collaborative. As you're looking at these applicants or as these profiles, you want to log notes, share it with your team, converse amongst yourselves. The applicant can't see it, but it does log the notes on the profile. Going back to file uploads, so I know for a fact that this is where it gets messy for many of you, is no matter what mechanism you use to collect applications, email, online forms, tools like Jotform, databases, wherever it is, you're basically collecting the applications, but then from there you have to then go find all the files that kind of correspond with them and then somehow merge them together. That's where the folders come into play. So in Reviewer, we just give you a quote unquote binder section called attachments. And then every single upload, again, this could be files like images, or it could be videos, it could be tax documents. They show up in this list. And then all you need to do is simply click on it, and then it will actually show up right in front of you. So yes, you can still download this, but the goal here is that I could be traveling on an airplane looking at this on my iPad, or I could be sitting at home on my giant monitor. The experience doesn't change, right? I go to somebody's profile, I click on the file, and then boom, there it is in front of me. I have no concerns around having the ability to access the deliverables, having the right softwares on my computer, open it, Microsoft Office, Apple tools, you name it. And then a similar concept goes with reference. Again, this is also multimedia, so photos and videos show up here, spreadsheets, whatever you can dream up. When it comes to your references, very similar. It'll actually show you a list of every reference that was submitted. In this example, we actually have 2 references and a transcript. That transcript actually came directly from the transcript office using that same mechanism. And when I click on the reference itself, it shows me what was filled out. So again, we took a person, they created a profile. It started with an application, and then it kind of grew into application, file uploads, references, all the activity logs, and then even bigger picture, like what happens, we're going to jump back up here to the top. What happens if Michael, the applicant, was selected? And now you need he or she to come back and submit to you guys a scholarship acceptance packet, or call it whatever you want. Michael will just go into his or her profile, click add new, pick what they're trying to add. So in this case, I want to add a scholarship acceptance packet, and then boom, it just pops up right in front of me. So he or she will then in the system fill this out, and then once they're done, they press submit, and then boom, it gets logged on their account, and then you can physically view the content. So this is going to continue. If you are a renewable scholarship, this might be how each year, every semester, they come back and self-report. There's lots of power there. So the last system I want to talk about here today is arguably the most important, and it's creating an ecosystem where the proper applicants are selected, right? At some point in time, like there isn't infinite money. If you are a scholarship provider that has infinite money, I'd love to talk because it's just not a thing. So we have to make that very hard decision of, okay, out of all my applicants, like who is going to get funded and or for how much money? And so the idea here is to kind of figure out how do we create an ecosystem where the right people with the most impact are the ones who we select. And I'm not getting super deep into this. I'm going to show it to you because I don't want to waste too much more time. I know we're running a bit long. Is to kind of look at like what is the proper mechanism to run this to ensure we get to that outcome. So a couple things come into play. Number one is the redaction of data. If you are collecting content in your scholarship applications that in theory could impact how a evaluator or a review team looks at that candidate, it should be redacted. Demographic details, potentially PII, whatever it might be. On top of that, you might be collecting a bunch of information for record keeping purposes that has no impact on the selection process. Redact that as well. We want to lower the barrier for the review team, similar to the applicants. We want them to get in, execute the task at hand, and then get out. So don't overwhelm them. On that note, we have some data here at Reviewer that basically looks at like how many submissions or applicants can an average volunteer review. That's a loose term because it's all about the complexity of your application form. It's all about the complexity of how you do your scoring. That will move these numbers. But on average, most volunteers really can't review more than 15 to 20 applications. Their energy levels drop off pretty dramatically, and the idea there would be, okay, well, if you were the first person that they review versus the 31st person, like you may not be scored on the same kind of parameters, and that's a problem. So how do you create like what I call buckets, or these workflows where you've got all these applications, you've got potentially all these people from your team to review? How do you start to pair them up? And that is a very personalized conversation that we'll have to have, or I would have with you guys, or you can think about internally. Do you have multiple scholarships? Each one might have its own review committee. Do you break it down by phases of review? So phase one is a simple thumbs up, thumbs down. In that use case, you can absolutely look at more than 20 people. And then from there, advance into a scoring phase, and then from there, advance into an interview phase, right? So there's ways that you take your big pool of applicants, and when I say big, it could be 15 or it could be 1,500. You bifurcate it down to these more bite-sizable pieces. And then from there, the last component to a very fair, non-biased selection is using some type of mathematical rubric. You guys can go completely deep into the weeds and weight it, right? So if your organization places a higher emphasis on references and storytelling and less of an emphasis on academics, that's fine. You can weight your scorecards. Others might just do simple thumbs up, thumbs down, right? Selected, not, there's a million ways to do it. But the goal there is to use some type of mathematics point value to help provide guiding principles to the review team. What we can't have happen is your volunteer or your committees come into the system or whatever tools that you use, look at a scholarship application, and then review it kind of how they want to, which is on a totally different expectation than another evaluator, right? Because now we're posing a significant challenge of where you might have two very qualified candidates, and the evaluator kind of looked at them through different lenses, and the not best candidate came out the other end. So using some type of rudimentary scorecard or a complex scorecard to at least help build a framework for discussion, and then from there, absolutely have those deliberation meetings. There's going to be an evaluator that wants to make a case for a certain applicant. That's totally fine. There needs to be something to start that conversation. If you want to go very cut and dry, going back to the example I gave earlier on, we call it a proof of process, which is basically if an applicant was to call you up and say, hey, I didn't get selected, I'm disgruntled, you can then go back and say, well, when you applied, we told you that this was the process. We were going to take your application. It was going to get reviewed 3 times. it was going to be redacted, and you're going to be scored on the score sheet. And then you have behind the scenes the tools in place or the systems to actually prove that you followed that workflow. The applicant's still going to be disgruntled, but at least they can't really kind of come after you. Again, seems like a small thing, but having a proof of process is a good thing to have. So what does that look like? So we basically collect these applications. Number one, redacting of data. So again, we know, for example, if this is Michael's first name, this is Michael's last name. It's very simple to instantly and automatically just say, don't show this to people. The next piece to this puzzle is creating review workflows. So there are a million ways to do this. My goal here is to visualize it here today. Very simple. Again, it could be by scholarship, it could be by committee, it could be by phase. You could break it by committee members. But the idea here is that I broke this one into 4 different phases, or 5, right? Phase 1 is a thumbs up, thumbs down, and then it has like multiple judging phases and then a final selection after an interview. The idea, though, is that the applicants basically get put into these buckets, ideally automatically based off of logic, and then you then take that bucket and fill it up with the team. So whenever Simon, Paula, and Mark come into a reviewer, they can physically only see these submissions in their bucket. Conversely, at the top, whenever Sally, Sue, and Steve come into the system, they see a completely different set of submissions because they're in a completely different bucket. So it's a really great way to pair up pools or committees. If you have donor advised funds, you might have like the Frederickson Family Foundation. Obviously, they're going to review only the applicants that you want them to look at. So things like that. One of the more popular components that I always recommend is leveraging potentially some type of randomization. So just because you've got all these applicants in this bucket and all these evaluators, what if we don't want them to look at more than 20 people, but we have 500 submissions, right? Like that's going to be very challenging. So what you would do is you'd actually open this bucket up, and you can do a couple different things. And there's a lot that we can go over. I'm not going to do it today. Is it shows you a listing of all of your applicants as well as who potentially could review them. And you can literally type in, give every applicant 3 reviews, which basically means they'll be scored exactly 3 times, no more, no less. And you can layer that on. You could also say, but at the same time, I don't want any of my team to look at more than 25 submissions or no less than 15. And then within Reviewer, the system will instantly take your submissions. It'll look at parameters you set and then divvy them out equally and randomly amongst themselves. And then it'll basically say, okay, based on what you just said, here's the results. Here's my committee. Each person has been given 3 submissions. However, Damon got 2 because the math didn't quite add up. And exactly these are the people that the reviewers are looking at. So if there was a conflict of interest, you could just click edit and then say, okay, well, I want to uncheck this person's name and then reassign it back out to somebody else. Kind of a little teaser, we just launched a new feature called judge queuing, because you're gonna have some judges who may want to look at a ton of people and some that just quite frankly can't. And so the idea is that you could say, okay, I want every applicant to get scored 5 times or 3 times or 10 times. It goes to your entire team, but then once that applicant hits that threshold, once it's been scored 5 times or 10 times, whatever it is, it then falls off the list and nobody else can score them. So it kind of empowers your review team to do as much as they want, but at the same time ensuring applicants are not going to get over reviewed, right? So things like that. So the last thing I want to talk about here, just as I'm kind of rambling here, is potentially how do you view results. So what's going to happen is the review team will simply come into the system, and they're going to see a list of who you want them to review. That list, once they open it up, again, it can be redacted, so it's customizable. They click on the applicant's profile and they get a split screen. So again, the goal here is to lower the barrier for the review team because at some point in time, like they have to allocate time. It has to be time that the applicants deserve. So side by side, they can view the applicant profile and they can start to fill out your score sheet, which again, is completely customizable. This is like a 5-question scorecard on scale from like, well, some of them are 1 to 10, some are 0 to 25, some might be weighted. But the judge or the evaluator can kind of side by side read the application, answer the score sheet. They can jump up to the file upload. They can look at the transcripts, the references. They can look at the videos. They can read the references side by side. And then once your evaluator is done, they simply press submit, they move on to the next, but then you in real time will basically get this leaderboard. And it shows you a list of literally every single candidate, the team or individual that reviewed them, and then how they individually or collectively scored as well as averages. So for many of you that are very cut and dry, you can take this filter from high to low and say, okay, we're going to award 5 scholarships. Therefore, Jordan, Sheldon, Richard, and Gabrielle are the 5 that we're going to fund. Others will say, okay, well, I want to use this as a vetting phase. I want to take the top 20 and move them on to phase 2. Great, you just select their names. At the bottom, you click advanced to, and then pick the phasation. So just because this data says that Jordan is the recipient does not mean that Jordan really is. Maybe similar along the lines here, one of your evaluators wants to make a really compelling case for Sheldon. That's fine. We just give you guys the data to make informed decisions. So a lot of our clients will pull this up on either in person or on like Zoom calls, and they just deliberate. Here's the results. Let's kind of talk about it. They shuffle things around. They reorganize it. Maybe it's not as simple as saying we're going to give out three $5,000 scholarships. Instead, it's $15,000 in funding. Let's give Jordan, 1,000. Let's give Sheldon 600 because again, you're taking into consideration what they need the funds for. So again, I'm trying to speak very highly because everybody has different processes, but it's also why it's absolutely critical that there are systems in place that address each one of those processes because it's going to be unique to you guys. So